Hello and a very warm welcome to the television podcast from RTS London with me, Andrew Eborn.
And me, Nadine Dereza. Every month we review some of the biggest television events and news stories with assistance of a fantastic all-star panel plucked from a rich pool of contributors and journalists, including titans of television, media moguls and industry giants who live and breathe TV.
In today's episode, we'll be shining a spotlight on two global TV events taking place right here in the UK, Eurovision and the Coronation. We'll also be spoiling you with a few regular features. But to get us started, ready for some more Hit That Floor, it's time for Eurovision.
So for the first time since 1998, the UK will play host to this year's Eurovision Song Contest on behalf of last year's winners, Ukraine. And 2023 marks the 67th edition of the competition as 37 countries compete for the coveted trophy. And it's going to put the UK TV industry back on the international map if it wasn't there already. And joining us now is Paddy O'Connell, presenter from BBC Radio and Eurovision Song Contest aficionado. Paddy, welcome. Now, does aficionado go far enough to describe you?
Oh, yes, but I'm aware, looking at myself on the return feed, I look like an old man at a bus stop. But 20 years ago, I attended my first Eurovision by accident. And people have accused me of being an aficionado, but I'm not really. I love the broadcast side of it. I love the radio and TV. And, of course, the fact that it was invented, Eurovision, really as a technical experiment to see if we could get pictures and sound from our neighbouring countries in the EBU, the Broadcasting Union. So, actually, curiously, I can't admit this on any other podcast, I'm a complete geek about the broadcast side.
And you've been there 20 years running, I believe. Is that right?
Yes, I've been to 20 of them. And I became aware very early as a media professional that the British had it entirely wrong. Say what you like about the contest, it's always had its knockers. This was the top of the TV talent in the world. The staging, the lighting, the directing, the satellites as was, the lines, the technology. The British people, the British press spent their whole time saying it was all rubbish, and that was 180% in the wrong direction. This was like the industry standard people, the best technicians in the world, who'd all be booked to do individual Grand Prix, Wimbledon, Ariana Grande concerts, and they'd all be involved in some way, or their companies at Eurovision. So the Brits have been completely sold a lie, especially people in the TV business who are listening to this and watching this. This is the platinum standard in your business.
And we have the Eurovision Song Contest and the Coronation so close together in May, which I think is going to remind the world that the UK is at the top table of TV production. So, aside from what you've just said already, what do you think is the significance of all of this to the UK TV industry?
Well, just as you said that, of course, my camera fell over, which, of course, is one of the things that we all love about live production. Both events are live. I think you've got the biggest sort of costume drama in the world between the Coronation and the Eurovision. And in terms of live TV, they'll be watched by hundreds of millions of people. It's a fabulous showcase for the creative people in our country and the technicians, the people who know how to mix pictures, graphic artists, and also, Britain's shop window. It's all the soft power on display at once. No one does pomp and pop like the Brits. We are the home pop music. We're the spiritual home. In Liverpool is its spiritual home. And we are the royal experts at putting on pageantry. We know what we're doing. And the TV cameras will lap it up. I mean, even that gold coach, just on the imagine when that moves. It was made in the 18th century. And the TV cameras will be picking that up, and all the uniforms, all the colours, all the public. And then when it comes to Eurovision, all the people just having a good time and with a camera pointing at them. And also, I've seen a leak of the lighting inside the stadium. It was sent to me in top secret yesterday. So I've moved from the Coronation now. I don't think the King's going to be in an arena. But I've seen the lighting, and I'm proud already about what the British industry is going to be putting on the screen.
Well, and yes, it's great to hear that you're excited about the lighting plans, but, how about the team behind the production? The BBC has employed Martin Green as MD to lead the team who are creating, planning and delivering this large-scale event. And he was head of ceremonies at London 2012, has got a stellar CV. So what do you think the significance of someone like Martin Green is going to be to the success of Eurovision overall?
Well, I think he is one of the TV's best performers. He would come first in many years if it was called the television song contest. What he did in 2012, it's worth remembering, is defy the critics. I was working in the media at the time, and we told the British people that the Olympics would be blown up, would be washed up, and would be a fiasco. And the media was totally wrong. It was a glorious, uplifting event. And one of the reasons was the sense of humour and the sense of scale captured on the TV production from the opening. I mean, you don't need me to remind you of what happened. Mr. Bean, the Queen in a helicopter, humour, all the things that we're known for on the screen. TV moments that even now, if you go and look at Mr. Bean playing the piano, it's still up there on the most watched YouTube moment. So Martin Green was the Wizard of Oz, and they've booked him for Eurovision. So I've been to meet him because I'm a big fan of his. He's not a friend of mine. I love people who in television who are so great, and all of us watching and listening to your podcast can name 100 people who've built careers and made jobs happen. And Martin's at the top of that tree. We should be very proud of an industry that creates him. But he's a massive Eurovision fan. So I met him in Liverpool. I toured the arena with him. And he's having such a great time. It's like, we've all of us worked for people whose productions are miserable. This is a happy man at the top of his game, bringing British sensibilities to this international event, not just in being so good, but in being friendly, and everyone around him is smiling. And it's only a stupid song contest. So, but everyone knows that TV people can get right up themselves and spoil everything. So Martin is a human. He's a top professional in his job. I would give him and he's in charge. I mean, it's like a rare event when the media people have got it right. I mean, all of us have worked on jobs when all the wrong people are in all the wrong jobs. And this is the opposite.
Oh, that's great to hear. So he's going to spread that joy, and it's going to be a great experience, isn't it, for the team and everybody watching as well. So come on, Paddy, where are you going to be during Eurovision week? I wonder where.
Well, I'm going to be in Liverpool. And in fact, of course, as I've said, I've already been there. So nutty am I about it. And I get back the semi-final commentary, which I launched in 2004, as you will remember, Nadine. You would have been watching.
Oh, yes.
And you would have been horrified in Istanbul when Lorraine Kelly missed her plane. And instead of me and her hosting it on BBC Three, it was just me. And this is what the stuff TV dreams are made of. Lorraine Kelly's plane is late. I mean, that's a chapter in my undemanded autobiography. And so inevitably, I'm going to be back putting the semi-commentary on Radio 2 now. So, I mean, I'm going to have to pretend I know about it. But as I've only revealed to you, actually, I just love the microphones. I love the TV. I love the history. I love the old black and white pictures of them in black tie. And now I find that 10, 12, 15-year-olds think it's trendy again. And all those stupid old British people who said it was rubbish, completely left behind. It's become a TikTok sensation, hundreds of millions of views of videos all around the place. It's a big TV workshop, as we're discussing, and I'm going to be there. I'll have to pretend to like the songs, but actually I'm going to be taking in all this tech and just loving the history of it. It began as a reality TV experience, as an experiment for studio managers, and now, look at it, Madonna sang in the middle of it, and not very well either.
Paddy, I wish you all the best and look forward to hearing you covering the semi-finals on BBC Radio 2, I believe. Paddy, thank you so much for your time. I know you're going to have a terrible time in May, so, I feel for you. Take care.
Bye. See you again.
Well, if Paddy O'Connell wasn't enough for all you Eurovision fans, we're now joined by Daniel Rosney, BBC News dedicated Eurovision reporter and co-host of BBC's Eurovision Cast. Hi, Daniel. Welcome to the television podcast.
Hello, thank you for having me.
No, it's great to have you on board. Now, the King and the Queen Consort unveiled the event set in Liverpool, which was very exciting. And you've had a chance to look at the set. So how's it all shaping up?
It looks fantastic, and I had a bit of nervousness mixed with excitement about getting to see the set yesterday because I got to see it before the King and the Queen Consort. I got to see it before a lot of my friends. And, there was strictly no pictures, no filming. And then completely unnecessarily, I ran across the Eurovision stage. I saw my moment and I seized it just to say that I've stood on the Eurovision stage. And in my head, I said, "Thank you, Europe," to an empty arena. So there was nobody there. So I got to pretend I was a contestant. But a few months ago, we got a sense of what the stage would look like. And I think that it achieved it. So the set designer, Julio Himade, he came on the Eurovision Cast podcast and he said that he wanted the stage to look like it was giving a big hug to Ukraine. So with the wings of the stage, it looks like the arms are outstretched. And, he wanted the 160 million who watch Eurovision every year to remember the reason it's in Liverpool. And it's in Liverpool, it's in the UK, but it's being hosted on behalf of Ukraine. And he wanted that emphasized throughout the staging, and even the little bits, I just thought the detail was fantastic. So in the top bit of the stage, right in the ceiling, there's a blue strobe light that goes across, and on the floor it's yellow, and that's obviously the two colours of the Ukrainian flag. So just the tiny details in the staging, it just reminds the audience at home that this is Ukraine's show as well as the UK's.
Now, you mentioned, I think, in a piece that you wrote online for the BBC, that the cabling for the lighting, sound and video could reach 8 miles if rolled out. I love those kind of facts. Have you got any other stats about the stage set?
Well, the stage takes around 4 to 5 weeks to be built. Now, I used to work at the Manchester Arena before I was a journalist for the BBC, and night after night, there would be a different stage that would be built for the different artists who would be on tour. So one night you could have Michael Bublé, he'd finish at 11 o'clock. They'd rip down the stage, take it to, I don't know, Nottingham. But in the meantime, Lady Gaga's trucks would turn up and they would build her stage. But a touring stage is much different to a Eurovision stage because a Eurovision stage is for 37 artists, plus all of the interval acts, plus the presenters. So the stage has to be a lot more versatile. It has to be adapted to work with all of the cameras and all of the lighting. And also, because each performer only has 3 minutes on stage, there are 60 seconds between each performance. So the stage has to be big enough, and the backstage area as well, so that they can whiz out all of the different props for all of the different artists. So one of my favourite things about the staging of this year's competition was actually behind the curtain, so the bit that we will never get to see on television, which was just organised chaos. And you would think that, in 2023, they'd have LED screens about, where people need to be. No, it's Post-it notes, it's arrows, it's old school TV production. And, on screen, it looks so slick, but backstage, it's still, notes in pen and highlighters. And, it's really interesting to see that as the technology evolves for what we see on television, behind the scenes, people still just like color-coded Post-it notes.
I can't wait to see it, though, on the night, though. So it sounds like the stage set, though, has been designed for both the audience and TV in mind. So two different audiences, but both need to be satisfied. Now, in terms of the acts and the countries, you know Eurovision inside out. So who should we be looking out for?
So there are a lot of people talking about Sweden this year. Now, if you go on any bookie's website in Europe, Sweden is currently the favourite to win Eurovision. And there has been a lot of chat about this particular artist for weeks, and that's because she's won it before. Her name is Loreen, and she won it in 2012 for Sweden with a song called Euphoria, and that became a massive hit across Europe. I've had a sneak peek to some of the interval tapes that will be played during the final of this year's Eurovision. And one of them, as we're going to wait for the points to come through, is Bjorn from ABBA. And he addresses the contestants who will be in the green room. And he says, tonight, one of your lives could change. And then, we'll be treated to a sequence of ABBA's journey from 1974. It's nearly 50 years ago since they won in Brighton. And he says, 50 years ago, I would never have thought that we would one day be avatars, which, they didn't exist then. So why would he think the technology didn't exist? But then he goes through some of the more recent contestants who've had huge success, like Måneskin won in 2021 for Italy. And they're a rock group, and their song was sung entirely in Italian. And they were nominated for a Grammy this year for Best New Artist. And they're playing Glastonbury in June. They played Coachella in America. Armenia last year, a singer called Rosalind, she came 20th out of 25. But her song went viral on TikTok. And I think that's really interesting that it is no longer just a TV event. You've got these social media platforms now which can help boost an artist's career. So because of her song going viral on TikTok, she now has, with Snap, the second most streamed Eurovision song of all time.
And Sam Ryder, he's restored pride, hasn't he, for the UK? So what are the UK's prospects of winning this year?
So I think the days of the UK getting 0 points are done. I would hope so anyway. I think that it was a big surprise for a lot of viewers last year when we started to get those points from across Europe. I remember on Twitter, the words, "what is happening?" was trending because so many people were unused to getting 12 points from those European countries. And I think there's a lot of pressure on May Muller this year's UK artist, because Sam Ryder came second. And, there might be a mindset for some TV viewers that, oh, now we're loved again and we're going to get top 3. But each year it's a different competition because there's different artists, there's different songs. And for Eurovision fans like myself and, people who follow this year in, year out, the aim is always left-hand side of the leaderboard. So that means top 13. So when you look at the leaderboard on screen, you want to be on the left-hand side. And for May Muller, that's her ambition. And she was speaking with the king and the queen consort. And the king said that he's going to be egging her on. May Muller told the king and queen consort that she wants to get off the stage feeling like she's never performed the song better. That's her ultimate aim.
And of course, where are you going to be on the night of the final? Maybe a silly question. You've got to be in Liverpool.
I will be in Liverpool. I will be either in the Arena Bowl or outside the Arena Bowl in the press centre, maybe dipping my head in.
Daniel Rosney, thank you very much. And if you want to see the recent RTS London event on how to win the Eurovision Song Contest, then head over to the RTS London YouTube channel.
The coronation of Queen Elizabeth II on the 2nd of June 1953 was a pivotal moment in the history of television. It was the event that marked the beginning of a new era, the coming of age of television and the modernisation of the monarchy. The BBC's coronation coverage was broadcast around the world. In the United States, 85 million people watched recordings. The nation itself turned their gardens, parks and streets into party venues, punctuated with Union Jack flags, bunting, cakes and coronation chicken, all in celebration of the new monarch. 70 years on, we're all ready to do it all again. There have, however, been seismic changes in the media landscape. Demands for our attention have also increased dramatically. So what can we expect in connection with the coronation of King Charles III on the 6th of May 2023? What are the logistical and technical challenges, and how will the audience be kept engaged as it munches on coronation quiche? Fantastic. Well, to help unpack those burning questions and many more, I'm delighted to be joined by the wonderful Tammy Hoffman, who's head of News Productions Archive at ITN Productions. Tammy, thank you so much for joining us.
Absolute pleasure.
So tell me, first of all, how did the coronation of Her Majesty the Queen impact the role of television in the landscape and change that media landscape?
I think it's the place you have to start when you're looking at today's coverage, because 1953 and that event was the tipping point. It propelled television to becoming a mainstream media. It's when we finally saw television viewing overtaking radio listening, and it demonstrated just how powerful video content could be. And to some extent, that's a perfect continuity to where we are today, where we are still feeling the ramifications of a world where video content is king.
And now, obviously, the planning of the coronation,
as well as Charles being king,
as well as Charles being something to do with it somewhere, and Archie celebrating his birthday at the same time, is all good stuff. Looking at the principle, however, what has changed since 1953 and what hasn't?
Well, I think the first thing is that in 1953, this was a BBC event. And in 2023, this is a joint broadcaster event. You can watch the full coronation on ITV News. You can watch it on the BBC. You can watch it on Sky. And through our various partnerships with agencies and international clients, you can see it all over the world. So I think that BBC monopoly is something we've certainly moved away from. Obviously, we've also moved away from a world where people simply consume on their television screens. We now have people consuming on their phones and on social media, and there will be some streaming on YouTube of the event, but also people will choose not to just be watching in real time and will be able to sort of catch up with clips and things afterwards. But I would actually say that although we do have this huge change in the media landscape of, streamers and social media and et cetera, actually, I think that it is these big live events where people actually are quite traditional in their viewing. And a lot of people will want to be watching it with their family, with their friends around a big television screen. I think there will be that kind of communal bringing people together and a sense of people watching the same thing at the same time. A real, tentpole moment.
And as you say, that was one of the great unifying things in 1953 is not many people had a telly, so you had to go round to your neighbours or go and watch it in cinemas. And I think the average number of people watching the sets at that time, about 9 people, I think they were saying.
Yeah. But I mean, is this something you want to see on a small screen? When you've got a jib sweeping up over Buckingham Palace, showing sort of the majesty of a procession with troops and guys on horseback and flags and bunting. I think that people want to see it on the best possible screen that they can. So I think we might actually be going for a bit of a throwback weekend in terms of how most people actually end up watching the coronation.
Right. And as you say, ITV wasn't even around during the last coronation.
Yeah.
What are we going to see this time?
So the day for ITV starts with GMB in the morning, and they'll have a coronation special showing all the build-up of crowds and of troops as they all get into position. And then from 8:30, we take over with the main coronation programme with Julie Etchingham and Tom Bradbury, who'll be anchoring that from Buckingham Palace. We also have a studio at Westminster Abbey where there'll be additional commentary throughout the entire service. And then obviously there'll be correspondents out there with the crowds, with the Red Arrows who are taking part in the fly past and other locations around the country. So a really great big spread. But the centre point, obviously, is going to be the procession and the service itself.
So tell me, some of the most big challenges, obviously, from a technical point of view. Talk to me about the logistical and technical challenges and how you've dealt with them.
Well, I suppose that we've had a couple of big events in the last couple of years to sort of help us get ready for this event. Obviously, with the funeral of the Duke of Edinburgh and then with the Queen. So to some extent, we have had a dry run of some elements of this, and it's a fairly well-oiled machine now in terms of deploying the crews and the camera positions for it. We've got 54 cameras along the route and a set of mini OBs dividing up different geographical areas so that we can bring all of those pictures back into ITN in a way that isn't overwhelming for the gallery crews back here. But obviously there's also some changes because the processional route is now going to go through Admiralty Arch and round Trafalgar Square and down Whitehall, which is different to the procession that we had for both of the funerals. So yes, we've had a lot of recce's in the rain over the last few weeks to make sure that, we're getting the very best possible cameras and the right professionals behind those lenses to give you the very best pictures that we can.
And what sort of lessons? Obviously, as you say, you've covered many major events since. What sort of main lessons have you learned?
Well, I think it's a different beast because we've actually had a date for this one. So many of the big royal events that we've covered recently, we didn't have a date for, and therefore the planning was very different. I think here we've had the luxury of knowing when it's happening. So that means that we've perhaps been able to plan it in a more well, we've had an end date to work towards, and we can kind of create a schedule and rehearsals along that. But I think you know, with an event like this, it's always about delegating and delegating it properly. No one person can be across all the different elements. It's just too big. And I think it's about trusting your team and trusting their expertise and making sure that they understand their area of responsibility, and then basically letting them get on with it.
And the palace themselves, I mean, I think it's been shrouded in secrecy, some of the aspects of it. Operation Golden Orb, I think is what they called it. To what extent have you had liaison with the palace regarding coverage?
Ultimately, the palace want a beautifully produced television production that can be broadcast to as many people across the UK as possible, and in fact, as many people around the world. And to some extent, that's exactly what we want as well. We want the most beautiful and the most fantastically produced event. So I think we're both working towards the same ends.
There's ongoing discussion between you and the palace, and the relationship, I think, is improving all the time regarding content and so on and so forth. How have you found that changed over your period of time?
I think, you know, there's always had to be a relationship between the palace and between broadcasters, because they want the coverage and we want the access to these brilliant pictures. But I think broadly we're aligned with the Coronation in wanting to produce the most beautiful programme with the very best camera angles to really allow viewers to feel as though they are there in the Abbey. And then the palace need our help to ensure that this goes out to the widest possible audience, both in the UK, in the Commonwealth and around the world.
And as with Eurovision, this is yet another fantastic opportunity to showcase brand GB. And there's nothing that we do better here in the UK than the pomp and ceremony that they love around the world. Talk to me about the international audience and what you do to attract them.
We don't need to do very much to attract them. Believe me, they're already engaged. I mean, certainly the drama, both the true one and the not so true one, things like The Crown and its international distribution, has really kind of fueled interest in the House of Windsor, and, you know, the real life dramas of the family as well. Other countries don't have a monarchy in the same way, and they don't have this pomp and ceremony, and they look to the UK for these events. I mean, I think you only have to look at the coverage that the Queen's funeral had around the world. It was immense. I mean, certainly when we work with our European broadcasting partners, the appetite across the whole of Europe, across all those countries, was huge during that week. We were really dominating the shared news content between European broadcasters. If we look at our social media channels, where obviously we've got really detailed analytics where we can look at the geography of where people are viewing, the States is immense for its consumption of social media content around the royals, especially, you know, with Harry and Meghan having moved over there. And I think that at ITN, we find that the interest from our international partners, both for our news coverage and for the TV documentaries about the royals that we produce, has been huge. And obviously, you know, we produced the Harry interview earlier this year, which has had incredible international distribution and been picked up by dozens of countries around the world.
And ITN Studios, rather, you're doing a live clean feed of the procession and events for international broadcasters and partners. How does that responsibility feel?
It's a weighty responsibility. So it's ITN who produced the clean feed, and we think of this basically as being the building block for our international partners' production. So we produce a clean feed without commentary or talent or graphics that they can then use to create their own programming around it. So it's obviously quite difficult trying to create something that's going to work for multiple partners in lots of different countries. So we have a gallery dial-in, for example, so that they know what's coming up and we can keep them abreast, and we speak to them in advance to get an idea of what they want. But ultimately, it's about trying to provide the most comprehensive, picture-rich narrative of the day so that it makes sense to a broadcaster wherever they are in the world picking it up. It's not jumping around between different locations. It's showing you the day and the very best pictures as it goes through, from the crowds building up right the way through to the balcony and then the flypast.
Fantastic. Well, and two final questions, Tammy. Firstly, where will you be on the day?
I will be in the gallery here at Gray's Inn Road producing the International Clean Feed. It's a privilege to sit in a gallery and see all those cameras lining up from all these amazing locations, watching the sun rise over London with it decked out in its finery. There is nowhere else I would rather be.
Oh, brilliant. And finally, will you be trying your hand at the Coronation quiche?
I'm probably going to be eating a slightly ropey sandwich on the day by the time I do get round to food. But yes, absolutely, I will be trying to make my coronation quiche in the weeks to come.
Fantastic. Tammy Hoffman, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, it's now time to talk about television viewing figures. And who better to do that with than the audience director from Barb, Matt Laycock.
Thank you very much for having us.
So, Matt, in this episode, we've spent a load of time talking about two huge-scale television events in May, Eurovision and, of course, the Coronation. So how big are these two TV events in May, both from a UK and global audience perspective? And what are the potential ratings for them?
Okay. Obviously two quite different events and consequently two relatively different answers as a result. Eurovision obviously is something that happens year on year, and we've got a good idea of what the historical ratings have been for Eurovision. In 2022, Eurovision was watched by 9.3 million people in the UK, and that was its highest audience since 2011. It was also the 10th highest rated television programme of the year. So it is a substantial audience. And we published something to our subscribers earlier this year to show it was one of the programs, particularly in the first 5 months of that specific year, with the highest co-viewing level, 1.74 viewers per view. But it sounds like a really esoteric thing. Let me put it slightly differently. 5.2 million people of the 9.3 watched it with at least one other person. So people are going around to each other's houses and watching it together. And, these are the types of things that event TV brings forward. And 9.3 million, not just a really high rating for 2022, but also by comparison to previous years. Sort of in the previous 10 years, removing the year that Eurovision was cancelled due to COVID, the ratings kind of bounce between the upper 6 millions and the upper 7 millions. So 9.3 million last year, really high. And I suspect that's probably got something to do with the quality of the UK entrant. Even I, a non-Eurovision fan, heard how popular this song was going to be. But one of the things that we have looked at, perhaps to cast forward to see how it might perform in the coming month, is back in 97 when the UK won with Love Shine a Light by Katrina and the Waves, that had an audience of about 8.5 million. And the following year, when the UK hosted the contest, and obviously we're going to host it again on behalf of Ukraine this year, the viewing audience jumped by 1.1 million to 9.6 million people. So we suspect that the viewing may be a little bit higher again this year. Interest potentially quite high because the UK are hosting it. So we suspect that it's going to be one of the bigger things, not just of this month, but also of the coming year. The EBU produced a report which talked a little bit about the 2022 contest. Obviously, Barb's remit is to measure audiences in the UK. So we're a little bit reliant on what we're able to get from organisations such as the EBU to amalgamate everything from everyone. And in 2022, the contest reached 161 million viewers across 34 markets that the EBU measured. Now, that's over the 3 live shows, but that figure was up 7 million year on year. So extremely popular. The UK audience was the largest audience of all of the markets, but that was the first time in 11 years that the UK had been the number one. Germany previously delivered the highest audiences for Eurovision. So again, very popular in the UK, but also very popular across the globe as well.
So how does the Coronation then figure in relation to Eurovision? That's surely going to get an even bigger audience in the UK and globally.
And the funeral of the Queen back in September last year was watched by 26.2 million people. Now, that in and of itself was a really unique event. It was broadcast across more than 50 channels. The reach was exceptionally high. It was 29 million people watching it, and there was a share of 95% of the viewing audience during the time that the funeral was on. It's enormous. And in a fragmented TV landscape, the chances of something producing an audience that high are remote unless it meets those kind of really special criteria where it's being broadcast a whole load of channels all simultaneously. We don't think that the coronation is necessarily going to pull in as many viewers as that. On the other hand, there's also things like the Platinum Jubilee, which obviously also happened last year. And the programming and the concert at the Palace were watched by 11.2 million people, and that peaked at around 13.4 million people. We suspect that the coronation is likely to sit in between these two events.
Thank you so much, Matt. Matt Laycock, Audience Director from Barb.
Thank you for having us.
It's now time to look at this month's major media stories. Who are our guests, Nadine?
Well, I'm delighted to say our guests are Janine Gibson, who's the editor of the Weekend FT, and also Roger Bolton, former BBC executive and independent producer, now presenting Roger Bolton's Beeb Watch. So welcome to you both. Right, we've got a few stories that we'd like you to cast your eye over. Let's start off, Roger, if I can come to you first, with a BBC review into the social media guidance in the wake of the Gary Lineker affair. Of course, John Hardy, the former television executive, is currently reviewing the BBC's social media guidance for freelancers after that row over impartiality involving its highest paid presenter, Gary Lineker. So what do you think the results of the BBC review will be?
I haven't the faintest idea. I'm very clear what they'll do if it was applied to the staff. They'll keep imposing the idea of impartiality, as they should do. I'm quite clear what they'll do about people who are very occasional freelancers, which is, of course, they can write what they like. It'd be better if they didn't write anything embarrassing, but there we are, it's up to them. The problem is in the middle between the freelancers who are effectively employed full-time by the BBC. I mean, look, Gary Lineker, he works for a number of broadcasters, and he's freelance, but he is the highest paid BBC, should we call him, employee, and has immense influence. And more importantly, he's a person who the audience thinks is a BBC figure. So what do you say to him? Well, I don't think you can say much. You can try to appeal to his better instincts and say you do realise that the BBC is in great difficulty and it would be very helpful if you didn't say anything about immigration until the election's over. And if he refuses to do that, well, you may only have one solution, which is not to renew his contract, which is a big deal. I don't see how John Hardy solves this, because the social media have just taken off in the way they are and sort of just begging people to think of the larger interests of the BBC. I don't know. So I'll be fascinated to see how he reports.
Do you think he's the right man for the job, though? He's a former CEO and editor-in-chief at ITN, executive vice president at Walt Disney, and he hasn't worked at the BBC. So is that impartial enough, do you think?
Well, I think that's pretty good qualifications. But the main problem, of course, is not within the journalism. It is within the entertainment, if you like, area. Whether anybody knows enough about that, I don't know. But he obviously is a good guy. He'll report fairly. But it's a Gordian knot.
And Janine, if I can bring you in now, BBC Director General Tim Davies said that the social media guidance will ensure that after the review has happened is clear, proportionate and appropriate now and in the future, and referred to obviously the BBC's important commitments to both impartiality and to freedom of expression. So do you think Tim Davies will get the review that he wants?
Well, look, I mean, the one piece of advice I can offer Tim, which I'm sure he'll be very grateful for, is that I've rewritten social media guidelines for 3 different new news organisations roughly 10 times over the last 7 years. Almost as soon as you finish writing them, you are going to be reviewing them, because that's the nature of the beast. It's not that surprising that I think they lasted them 2 years ago. That's not a bad sort of duration. I would say that I think the most important thing is making the distinction between journalists and everybody else. That actually the bit about freelance versus staff, Roger's right, it's a continuum. And some people are more staff and some people are more freelance, but actually when it comes to essentially an arrangement for tax reasons, if you're on every week, you are an entertainment voice of the BBC. I just think the place where you have to hold the line is news and current affairs. When I've worked for written social media guidelines that cross news and people that don't work in news at organisations like BuzzFeed or even The Guardian, you are naturally going to pay much more attention to what your news journalists do than what somebody who writes for the non-news sections or works in the video team or on podcasts or elsewhere in the organisation. You can be a lot freer, and that I think is the battle that the BBC should be fighting, rather than with its own staff. Is the perception battle that says journalists need to observe propriety. If other members of staff, this is not a question of impartiality for them. It's not their job.
So if the BBC were consulting you, and it's about having clarity and confidence.
I'm amazed they haven't, quite frankly.
Well, they might do after this podcast. So what's going to happen is obviously you need clarity both for the presenters and for the general public. What do you think the BBC should have as their general rule?
I mean, I think if you're a journalist, you can do reporting. But you shouldn't really have opinions. That's the general rule. If you work in news, you don't have opinions. Of course, you have opinions in your private life, but as far as the rest of the world is concerned, you just don't. You don't go on marches. You don't tweet jokes about politicians as much as possible. I mean, we've all done it, and you don't have opinions. And if you do, then you should expect to be pulled up pretty sharply for it.
And sports presenters, what are they allowed to say?
Honestly, I don't understand why we are getting such a fuss. Who cares what the football presenter thinks? Gary Lineker's a very good football presenter. You get in a mess if you try and restrain what he thinks.
So when they consult you for the policy, you'd say he should be able to say that?
Yes, absolutely.
But there's another problem here, if I may say so, just to complicate it further, which is what do you do about journalists, brilliant journalists like Andrew Neil, who has not disguised his personal views and is in charge of The Spectator and a whole range of other things, and then goes on television and is probably the best political interviewer there is, and whenever I've seen him on the BBC, absolutely impartial. So I think that's another complication. You want a range of views. You don't want to have a group of people presenting the programme all the same. But how do you let these people in and yet maintain a rule that they should not post on social media about things they care about? That's a further complication. I think you've got to have almost a separate category for that. I agree, this is fiendishly difficult, but the political fact is that if Gary Lineker tweeted every week about immigration up to the election, knowing that this is a big issue that the Tory party is going to run on, and Labour Party is going to run on, I mean, it creates a great difficulty for the organisation. It's going to embarrass the BBC. So I guess all you can do is to say, Gary, please don't.
Right, which is a request and cannot be codified in guidelines would be my. I think that's management rather than a principle that you put into a set of guidelines.
So we're agreed about the thing that's going to come out of this, and not clear guidelines at all.
Yes,
we are at Eden. Thank you very much indeed. I'm glad we sorted that out.
Indeed, and actually we'll be looking at that story. So the review will take into account social media use of those working in the on-air freelance community, outside news, current affairs and factual journalism. So we're none the clearer, are we?
Thank you.
Let's move on, shall we? Let's have a look at ITVX, launched on the 8th of December 2022, which had coincided with the FIFA World Cup. That was brave of them, which replaced the ITV Hub as the online home of all ITV content. So, Janine, has ITVX had a good launch, and how important is ITVX to ITV's future?
When you sent me the topics that we might discuss for this podcast, I thought, that's very funny. I wish I had some data on the number of complaints I've had about how rubbish ITVX is. And I thought, I just searched my phone. So I did. I searched my phone and I found 12 different threads on my phone across several messaging platforms and several of my parents. I have lots of parents for complicated reasons. And all of them contained complaints about why doesn't ITVX work? I am trying to watch a show, a thing, and I can't make it work. Have they made it worse? Why can't you do something about it? So I would say.
But surely, Janine, it's better than ITV Hub, is it not? Is it
no,
not?
This is exactly the point of the people who are my correspondents in my phone. How can this be worse than ITV Hub? I think it didn't help that they tried to roll it out during a football tournament. That was perhaps not wise.
Yeah, I'm pretty incompetent, but I managed to get hold of ITVX without any trouble at home. And I love it because I'm unfortunately moving into that territory where I binge watch. You know, when you're a bit older, you don't have a lot to do. You switch it on. Well, why not? Another episode and then another episode. So I really enjoy that. There's no question which direction we're all going. The question is how quickly you go in that direction. And what strikes me, it's like saying to somebody, we're all going to die, therefore we might as well commit suicide now. So you've got to judging the pace at which you move across digital, and also the people you will leave behind, if you're not careful, who may be some of your most loyal supporters or viewers. So that's the move. But I mean, it has to be the right thing for them to do. The question is how good the technology is and how quickly they push forward, and whether they do experiment on occasions with, not putting all episodes up at once so you can binge watch something, and try and bring people, back week after week, and make an event of it. The problem with putting everything, as you know, on immediately is that you get a big bang at the beginning, but you don't get a regular audience coming back and a sense of building enthusiasm and newspaper reviews and so on. So you build your audience that way. So it's a delicate judgment about how much, but we're heading in that direction and they have to go there.
When people are complaining that it doesn't work, what they're really talking about is live streaming, which is not the primary function of most streaming sites, including Netflix, which also recently had a car crash of a live stream event, which they couldn't make work. And to give the poor old beleaguered BBC some credit, that we do not credit them enough for having built the actually only consistently functioning live streaming service sort of in the world. It still remains an extraordinary innovation and does, all for whatever they're calling it this week, and ITVX do have a lot to live up to because they're in the same market as the BBC.
Right, we're going to move on now. Janine, Netflix has come a long way since it started posting DVDs to customers in the United States in 1998, launched its streaming service in 2007, and is now the world's leading streaming entertainment service with more than, I think, 232 million subscribers when I last look, although I think they are shedding a few since they've changed their policy on sharing passwords. So what's your take, Janine, on how Netflix are doing at the moment in terms of subscribers, and how has their new sort of business models about, a lower price, but you get ads gone down, do you think?
So, I mean, we've seen from the numbers that they are very price sensitive. I think much more price sensitive than they thought they were. And the crackdown on sharing has, as you say, gone down like a lead balloon and has already had an impact on subscriber numbers. More broadly, though, I think, and I hesitate to use such a vague term in this august RTS company, but I think there is a bit of a vibe shift around the streaming services. Netflix has fallen victim a little bit to the Hoover curse of becoming the generic name, the trademark name for the generic service. So people talk about Netflix, but they don't really mean Netflix. They're talking about Disney or Apple, almost as much, and Amazon almost as much as Netflix. I think Disney seems to have taken away the reputation for the really high volume stuff, really, and many of the movies, because Netflix doesn't really stream studio movies so much anymore. So you've got all your Marvel and all your Star Wars and most of the big high volume sitcoms which pull the rest of the junior members of the family in. Those are all on Disney. And then Apple has all the sort of very high-end premium production shows. Over the last year, they've won several awards and have really kind of taken out the Emmys and the Golden Globes market as well. So I think Netflix is being squeezed on all fronts. The quality of the programming, those sort of casual. I want to call it casual dining, but you know what I mean, like snacking television, where basically it's on and nobody's really watching it. That's sort of that used to just be Friends and is now largely Disney, I think. And this sort of crackdown on pricing that is making people question why they have it and its utility-like nature in the living room. So it's a very, very challenging time for them, I think.
Yeah, it is indeed. I mean, they're great numbers, but you're right. It's a competitive landscape, isn't it? And Roger, the service starts in the UK from £5 per month, not that I work for them, and goes up, that's with ads, and then stretches to £16 a month for a premium plan. Where are you on that plan?
I don't think I feature. No, I have basic Netflix service. But what intrigues me about it is whether or not you could. There used to be a situation where people would be loyal to a brand or loyalty to a challenge or a channel or a network. Are people loyal to something like Netflix in the same way? If you're loyal to Disney, then your echoes of or memories of one childhood come forward. But do people feel anything for Netflix as opposed to another organization, or will they judge it solely on the basis of whether at this particular moment there is something they want? And if they don't deliver what they want within a 6-month or 3-month period, let us say, when you're thinking about renewal, are they very vulnerable to people saying, oh, no, okay, we'll switch off? In other words, it's a massive business, but you would have thought that, most businesses up and down 5%. It strikes me this is a business that could go up 15, 20%.
I think, and more broadly, there's now a movement in the US, which is essentially, you'll remember cutting the cable when everybody gave up their cable TV at $100 a month or whatever, and switched to streaming services. And people are now, not unsurprisingly, and I think as you just said, during the pandemic, nobody was really doing the monthly maths, but people, for all the reasons we've discussed, are now doing the monthly math, and your football subscription is disaggregated from your kids' television subscription, from your movie subscription, from your and being much more picky and choosy about services.
And also with Amazon, you're getting a package, aren't you, of you're getting a number of things. I want to order a book, go by Amazon. It's got a wider brand, hasn't it? So you think, well, do I want to give this up? Well, maybe they haven't been doing too well with programs at the moment, but actually rather value this other service. So they have to screw up in a number of areas, don't they? Or to, cause dissatisfaction in a number of areas before you reject them. Whereas something like Netflix is only basically, it's a one-trick pony.
Interesting stuff. Roger Bolton, Janine Gibson, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, now it's time to look ahead at some of the key TV highlights for May. And who better to do that with than the TV previews editor from the Radio Times? Yes, I'm talking about Frances Taylor. Frances, hello and welcome to the Television Podcast. How are you doing?
Hello, I'm very well, thank you. And thanks so much for having me.
And we've asked you to select your 5 top picks, your recommendations for the month of May. An interesting first choice from Disney+.
Yes, and again, it's a sort of a National Geographic / Disney Plus production. And Disney Plus, especially when it first launched, this is not the sort of programming that they were known for initially, but they really, they've got a recent advertising campaign actually that's really trying to hammer this home. It's kind of saying Disney Plus has programs you wouldn't expect, and this is absolutely one of those. It's called A Small Light, and it's based on a sort of true story of this remarkable woman called Meet Geese, who, along with her husband Jan, helped shelter the Frank family during the Second World War in Amsterdam. So she worked as a secretary to Anne Frank's father, and she obviously took a huge personal risk in kind of agreeing to be in on their sheltering, and she helped bring food to them and take care of arrangements and all that kind of thing. So obviously most viewers, hopefully, will be familiar with Anne Frank's story, but perhaps not so much when it comes to Meep. So it's a story that really deserves to be told, but it's it's really tense. It's really well produced, and of course, we know the end of the story. It's such a tragic part of history, and there's a foreboding to how it ends, obviously, right from the beginning. But it really kind of hooks you in and makes you want to go to the next episode. It's very heartfelt, very evocative. But Belle Powley is the kind of lead as Meep. And recently saw her in Everything I Know About Love on the BBC. She's also going to be starring in Apple's new series, Masters of the Air, which is going to be a big one for them. But her performance of it is very sparky. She's a big force of nature, and it feels very modern, perhaps a little bit too modern at times, that some people might not get along with. But otherwise, I think it's a really well done drama. But I think the only other thing I would say about it is, as viewers, we've become so used to kind of authentic and subtitled programming, and that's somewhere that this perhaps falls down on, and it would have been more perhaps effective and evocative if it weren't in English and perhaps had more kind of Dutch and German actors instead.
If people hadn't got enough right royal romps in the real world, you could also jump over to Netflix to see Queen Charlotte. Tell me a bit about that.
Yes, well, I mean, to say anticipation about this Netflix drama is high would be quite the understatement, because Bridgerton has been an absolute phenomenon, and this spin-off is really long awaited. It's a prequel, and it is finally here on the 4th of May. So, again, over 2 series of Bridgerton, we've got to know these characters like Lady Danbury and, King George. But this is all about the origins, really, of Queen Charlotte and King George and how they got together, but also how her sort of relationships, how Charlotte's relationships formed with the kind of young Lady Danbury and those around her. So it's, again, all episodes are written by Shonda Rhimes, who is the creator of Bridgerton, and she sums it up nicely, I think, when she says it's part of the Bridgerton universe, but it's also a completely new world. And I'd say that's how it feels. The main thrust of it is very new. They've got a lot of new and very talented, I have to say, sickeningly talented young people joining the cast, which is brilliant. But it does also flash forward. So we do get to still see, again, the characters that we know. We've still got Julie Andrews narrating as Lady Whistledown as well. So, yeah, you kind of get to see the relationships develop between, yes, Queen Charlotte and Brimsley, Queen Charlotte and Lady Danbury from their initial meetings. And so from just the first episode, and I have only seen the first episode, it really seems like a nailed-on success, and it will be as sort of addictive and as bingeable as Bridgerton was too.
Your third pick is the BAFTA Television Awards, taking place BBC One, I think May the 14th. So, why are you particularly looking forward to this one?
Well, I think it's always quite exciting when you get new BAFTA hosts. So we do have that this year with Romesh Ranganathan and Rob Beckett, who I think actually are an absolutely brilliant double act on their sort of Sky entertainment series. They're very funny. I mean, obviously, hosting these kind of award ceremonies can always go one of two ways, and even the most seasoned comics or performers can fall down. But I do have very high hopes for them.
Also mid-May, we're being spoilt, BBC One, we have the £10 POM. What a great title.
Yes, it's a funny one, this, because I wasn't really familiar with the £10 POMs as a phrase, but then I looked into it, and it's actually really interesting. It's a scheme, if you didn't know, it was a scheme in the 1950s where people from Britain paid £10 to emigrate to Australia, and this drama is obviously dramatising that and taking perhaps some creative licence. But we follow this family played by Warren Brown and Faye Marsay. They play Annie and Terry. They're a married couple who take up this offer. They think it's brilliant. Annie is kind of not having the best relationship with Terry at the time and thinks that this will be a fantastic new start for them, only to find that actually when they arrive in Australia, their circumstances and the accommodation isn't quite what they expected it to be. They also face a lot of discrimination for being British, and Terry's problems, not to give too much away, but they don't really stay hidden for very long. But I don't know where this will actually fall in the schedules as yet. It feels quite like a kind of Sunday night, 8 p.m. one kind of drama. I can imagine it going there, but it's actually written by Danny Brocklehurst, who you might know from Ordinary Lies. He also has written Brassic. He's obviously a big fan of working with Michelle Keegan because she's in both of them as well as this as well. So yeah, there's a bit of mystery. It takes a bit of a turn at the end of the episode as well that hints it could be a bit more meat on the bones that it might initially appear. But yeah, it certainly makes you want to watch on to the next one after episode 1.
And the last one that you had was High Desert on Apple TV, and that comes in sort of mid-May, May the 17th, for the global premiere, starring Patricia Arquette, Matt Dillon, I believe.
Yes, it does. And one of the executive producers, as well as Patricia Arquette, is also Ben Stiller, and amongst this huge list of very starry people. So it's got a lot of sort of pedigree behind it. But I'd say, again, watched episode 1. I think it would be quite easy to switch off after 10 to 15 minutes. I think you might think, oh, I don't know where this is going. It seems a bit all over the place. But if you are thinking that, don't, because it does take a while to get going, but and actually draw you in. But once it does, I really think you're rewarded. And again, at the end of the first episode, it really makes you think, okay, right, we're on to something here. There's something quite special. So it stars, obviously, yes, Patricia Arquette. She plays the lead as Peggy. She's kind of a recovering, sort of a semi-recovering drug addict. And her mother dies, and she sort of then finds herself bumping up against her two siblings who, by all accounts, they seem to kind of have their lives together, but she doesn't really. And they want her to get a job and, most importantly, move out of the house she shared with their mum. So she kind of goes on this journey to try and actually get a job. And she ends up kind of trying to train as a private investigator. It all sounds a bit convoluted, but it really does work. I imagine Peggy as this kind of type of character for what, if the White Lotus is Tanya, it's kind of what she would be like if she lost all of her money and ended up really down on her luck.
Frances Taylor, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, that's it for the very first episode of the television podcast from RTS London. Thank you very much for joining me, Andrew Eborn.
And me, Nadine Dereza. We look forward to seeing you again soon.